What if I told you that the version of someone you think you know, the kind, collected, charming version, might not even be real? What if everything you trust about someone's character is just a carefully constructed mask? And worse, even they don't know they're wearing it. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, made a discovery so confronting, most people can't handle it. He said you don't need years of friendship, a resume, or deep conversations to know who someone really is. You just need to watch two things and ask two deceptively simple questions. That's it. But once you know how, you'll never look at people the same way again, including yourself. You see, we live in a world of performances. We perform on dates, at job interviews, on social media, at family dinners. Every smile, every compliment, every "I'm fine," it's part of the act. But underneath all of it, buried beneath the image we want the world to see, lives a shadow. And here's where it gets disturbing. Jung discovered that the shadow isn't just something we hide from the world, it's something we hide from ourselves. That's why these two questions, these two moments of exposure, are so powerful. They bypass the curated persona and go straight into the unconscious, the place where your truth lives, unfiltered, unedited, and untamed. Imagine sitting across from someone you love. A friend, a partner, a leader, a parent. You've known them for years, and yet, in the space of a few seconds, you see something in them you've never seen before. A flash of contempt, a cruel smirk, a dismissive gesture, or maybe nothing at all. Just silence when they should have spoken. You realize this isn't new. It's just the first time you were awake enough to notice. These cracks, the way they treat someone with no power, the way they react to having power, the way they answer two simple questions. They don't just reveal character. They are character, because as Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Most people don't know who they are. They don't want to know. It's easier to keep performing, easier to stay liked, respected, in control. But the truth always leaks out, in micro moments, when the ego is distracted, when the persona slips, when power tempts or pressure exposes. And if you're watching closely, you'll catch it. Their truth and yours. This isn't manipulation. This isn't judgment. This is awakening. So if you're ready, really ready, to see people for who they are and to see yourself without the mask, then pay close attention. Because what Carl Jung discovered isn't just psychological. It's spiritual, it's dangerous, and it's liberating. Let's begin with the one thing every person is wearing, and the one thing they'll do anything to protect. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to face the world. It's not fake, it's functional. A necessary costume stitched together from childhood survival, societal rules, family expectations, and fear. It allows us to belong, to fit in, to be accepted. But make no mistake, it's not who we are. The persona is what we want to be seen as. Kind, smart, strong, polite, humble, charming. But the price of wearing a mask too long is forgetting who's underneath. Behind the persona lives what Jung called the shadow. And this is where things get uncomfortable. The shadow isn't evil, it's unconscious. It contains all the traits we've learned to reject in ourselves. Anger, jealousy, pride, weakness, the desire to be seen, the hunger for power, the longing to belong, even joy if it was ever punished or ignored. The shadow is everything we've been told is too much or not enough, so we bury it. We disown it, and we learn to hate it, first in ourselves and then in others. That's why Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Because the people we despise, the selfish, the loud, the arrogant, the dramatic, they're often carrying the very traits we've suppressed. And the kicker? The more we reject our shadow, the more it runs our lives. You can't see it in words. You can't see it in rehearsed behavior. But Jung found that there are moments, rare, revealing moments, when the mask slips and the shadow steps forward. It's not what someone says when they're calm. It's what they do when they're challenged, embarrassed, admired, or ignored. In those moments, the persona can't hold. And what emerges isn't a reaction, it's revelation. That's why Jung spent decades studying these leaks. He knew you could learn more from one unguarded moment than 1,000 polished ones. You can't read the shadow in a resume, or a smile, or a quote about empathy. But you can see it clearly when someone is speaking to a person they don't need, or holding power they didn't earn, or being asked to admit they were wrong. And here's the truth Jung uncovered. The real self is revealed not by what we control, but by what we can't. If you want to know someone's character, don't listen to what they say when they're ready. Watch who they become when they're not. And the first lens, Jung discovered, is this. How do they treat the ones who can do nothing for them? There's a test more revealing than any personality quiz, more honest than any confession. You don't need a degree in psychology to use it. It doesn't require years of analysis or hours of therapy. All it takes is observation. Watch how someone treats the powerless. Carl Jung didn't use that exact phrase, but everything in his work pointed here. He knew the persona shines when there's something to gain, but it crumbles in the presence of someone who offers nothing. No status, no benefit, no audience, no leverage. That's why the most reliable character test happens in the most ordinary places. At restaurants, in lobbies, on sidewalks, during mistakes. Because when there's no script to follow, what remains is instinct. And instinct is shadow. Does their tone shift when they speak to a waiter? Do they make eye contact with the janitor? Do they say thank you to the barista? Or do they pretend not to see them at all? The world calls it the waiter rule. Jung would call it something deeper, a crack in the persona, a flash of unconscious truth. Because the powerless trigger the parts of ourselves we can't perform. If someone is cold, rude, or dismissive to those in lower positions, it's not because they're having a bad day. It's because they see people as tools. When there's no advantage, they retract their kindness. And that's not a mood. That's a mirror. Jung saw arrogance not as confidence, but as compensation, a disguised fragility. The person who belittles others isn't powerful. They're bleeding. They've mistaken superiority for safety. Because beneath the scorn for the powerless lies fear. Fear of being overlooked, disrespected, powerless themselves. And so, they overcorrect. They dominate. They mock. They joke. And they reveal their most unhealed self. One of Jung's most unsettling insights was this. Arrogance toward the powerless is almost always a defense mechanism, a response to internal shame. Think about that. When someone mocks the awkward, the poor, the anxious, the clumsy, the broken, they're not exposing weakness in the other. They're exposing rejection within themselves. They're punishing traits they were once shamed for. And by attacking those traits in others, they try to prove they've outgrown them. But all they've done is bury them. This is why projection is so common in these moments. You'll see it. The harsh judgments, the disproportionate anger, the unnecessary cruelty. A server brings the wrong drink, and the mask slips. The receptionist is slow, and the tone sharpens. The stranger takes too long to speak, and they interrupt, roll their eyes, walk away. These aren't just bad manners. They're flare signals. You're seeing the shadow bar in real time. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And when someone erupts over a minor inconvenience, you're not witnessing annoyance. You're witnessing a war with the self, a war they haven't admitted, let alone resolved. But here's the other side. Someone who is genuinely kind to the invisible, the imperfect, the slow, the powerless. That's someone whose empathy isn't for show. That's someone whose character doesn't depend on who's watching. Because real kindness doesn't change when there's nothing to gain. So the next time you want to know who someone is, don't watch how they treat the powerful. Watch how they treat the powerless, the ignored, the silent, the ones society says don't matter. Because in those moments, you're not just seeing how they treat others, you're seeing how they treat themselves when the mask is off. And if that doesn't tell you everything, nothing will. If the first lens is how someone treats the powerless, the second lens is what happens when they become powerful. Because Jung knew, power doesn't change people, it reveals them. He said it plainly. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But here's the part most people miss. It's easy to seem kind when you're not in charge. It's easy to look humble when you have nothing to protect. But the moment success arrives, the moment power enters the room, the real self steps forward. You've seen it. Someone gets promoted, and suddenly their tone changes. Their replies get shorter. They start interrupting more, listening less. The promises they made fade into, "I'm just really busy now." The ego inflates, not because they've grown, but because the mask now believes it is the face. This isn't always loud. In fact, it's often quiet. It looks like seen messages left unanswered. Passive power plays, subtle disrespect. The unspoken message, "I don't need you anymore." Modern neuroscience suggests that when people gain status, empathy can actually decline. Studies show mirror neuron activity may lessen. Jung didn't frame it in neurological terms, but he warned of the same danger through what he called ego inflation, when power swells the ego and empathy fades. This is why so many nice people become cold when they rise. Not because they're evil, but because they're exposed. The persona is no longer needed, so it dissolves. And what's underneath, the unconscious fear of insignificance, becomes the new driver. Jung called this ego inflation. It's what happens when someone becomes so identified with their power that they lose contact with the parts of themselves that are still wounded, still scared, still human. And when that happens, they stop listening. They stop reflecting. They stop admitting wrong. They don't have to anymore. But real strength, Jung knew, doesn't come from pretending to be invincible. It comes from holding power without losing empathy, from rising in status without shrinking in soul. So if you want to know who someone really is, don't look at their resume. Look at what they do when no one can challenge them. Look at how they handle admiration, responsibility, authority. Do they become bigger than the room? Or do they create space for others to rise too? Because if kindness disappears when power arrives, it was never real. Power doesn't create character, it exposes it. And in Jung's world, that exposure isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of individuation. If you're willing to face what's revealed, words are cheap, behavior is truth. Jung understood this long before social media made it obvious. The louder the declaration, the more likely it's hiding something. I care about people. I believe in respect. I'm loyal. These are easy to say. They sound good. They build persona. But Jung warned us, the persona is the mask we wear, not the person we are. So don't listen to declarations. Watch for alignment. Does the loyal friend vanish when you're at your lowest? Does the respectful partner mock you when no one's listening? Does the one who preaches empathy turn cold the moment you disagree? Jung believed that unconscious patterns leak out, not through language, but through behavior. As Jung emphasized, the shadow reveals itself in actions, not intentions. Or in simpler words, we are defined less by promises than by patterns. The shadow doesn't speak in quotes. It speaks in reactions. You'll see it in contradictions. The person who calls themselves non-judgmental but gossips behind closed doors. The leader who claims to value people but never remembers your name. The influencer who preaches mental health while degrading others for clicks. These aren't flaws. They're reveals. Because real character doesn't need a PR team. It lives in the quiet choices, showing up when it's inconvenient, apologizing without being asked, staying kind when there's nothing to gain. The gap between someone's words and their behavior is the gap between persona and shadow. And the wider that gap, the less they know who they are. So next time you hear someone say, "You can trust me," ask, do they actually show up when I need them? When they say, "I care," ask, were they there when it counted? When they say, "I respect you," ask, do they still say that when they're angry? Don't look for language. Look for patterns, because a promise is just a sentence. But consistency is a soul contract. And in Jungian psychology, the most telling truths aren't spoken, they're acted out. What kind of person can you absolutely not stand? It sounds like a simple question, but Jung discovered it unlocked something terrifying and profoundly revealing. He called it projection, the process by which we unconsciously disown parts of ourselves and then see them loudly in others. And this question, it's a flashlight pointed straight into the shadow. When you ask someone, "What kind of person do you hate most?" you're not learning about the world, you're learning about them. Their rejections, their repressions, their internal war zones. If they say, "I hate liars," Jung would ask, where are they lying to themselves? Where are they refusing to face their own truths? If they say, "I can't stand selfish people," Jung would probe, have they buried their own desires so deeply that others' needs now feel threatening? If they hate the weak, he'd say, they're terrified of their own vulnerability. It's not about the trait itself. It's about the emotional charge behind it. The heat, the intensity, the disgust. Jung knew the more emotional someone becomes when describing what they hate, the more likely they're describing something hidden within. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Because sometimes what we reject isn't bad. It's just unacceptable to our identity. The confident person we call arrogant, maybe they're embodying a self-worth we've never dared to express. The joyful person we mock as too much, maybe they're reminding us of our own buried aliveness. The shadow contains not just what we fear, but what we long for. And this is why the question is so powerful. Who do you hate isn't about the other person. It's a map to the disowned self. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That irritation, that visceral reaction, it's not random, it's a mirror. And the stronger the reaction, the closer the reflection. But here's where it gets even deeper. Ask this question not just to others, ask it to yourself. Who triggers you the most? Who makes your skin crawl? Who do you mock under your breath or silently judge? Now ask, what are they showing me about myself? This isn't an invitation to self-blame. It's an invitation to self-awareness. Because if you can trace your judgment back to its root, you'll find a part of yourself you've been afraid to meet. And only by meeting it, by naming it, can you integrate it. The shadow isn't evil, it's rejected. And it will keep showing up in others until you finally stop and say, I see you, I know you, you are part of me. Only then does the projection end, and true self-knowledge begin. Tell me about a time you were absolutely certain you were right, but turned out to be wrong. Jung believed that this question, more than any other, cuts straight through the ego. Because in that moment, when we're asked to revisit the collapse of our certainty, something rare happens. The persona stumbles, and the real self has a chance to speak. You see, being wrong isn't just a factual mistake. It's a psychological earthquake. It shakes the identity we've built, the illusion that we're in control, that we understand ourselves, that we always know best. Jung called this the ego ideal, the polished self-image we carry, made of competence, intelligence, morality, and pride. But when we're proven wrong, the ego ideal is threatened. And when that happens, most people don't reflect, they defend. The defense mechanisms are predictable. Denial. I wasn't actually wrong, the facts just changed. Rationalization. I had good reasons at the time. Projection. They misled me. Minimization. It wasn't a big deal anyway. But Jung saw these as spiritual evasions, not just psychological habits, but obstacles to growth. Because how someone handles being wrong reveals whether their self-worth is rooted in reality or illusion. If they get defensive, you're not seeing confidence. You're seeing fragility dressed up as pride. If they blame, you're not seeing clarity. You're seeing fear of shame. But when someone pauses, takes ownership, maybe even laughs gently at themselves, you're witnessing something rare. Jung called this integration, the capacity to hold both light and shadow, success and failure. Without collapsing, the ability to say, yes, I was wrong, and I'm still worthy. That's not weakness, that's evolution. He wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And no one becomes who they truly are by being right all the time. They get there by being wrong and choosing awareness over ego. Now pay attention to how people answer this question. If they can't think of a single time they've been wrong, that's not confidence, it's delusion. Jung called this psychological inflation. When the ego becomes so swollen with self-image, it loses all contact with reality. If they casually brush off their mistakes, it's not humility, it's avoidance. Jung discovered some people pretend to own their flaws just enough to avoid examining them. He called this the self-deprecating defense, a clever way to dodge the deeper work. But if someone can sit in their mistake, feel the discomfort, reflect on the damage, and still move forward with honesty, they're not broken, they're whole. So ask yourself, how do you handle being wrong? Do you run? Do you deflect? Do you apologize out of habit just to move on? Or do you sit with it? Let it humble you? Let it teach you? Jung believed that only those willing to face their fallibility could ever touch the truth of who they are. Because real character isn't revealed when we're right. It's revealed when we realize we weren't. Jung wasn't interested in surface behavior. He looked deeper, into the unconscious patterns that drive how we react, how we justify, how we defend. And when it came to these two questions, about projection and fallibility, he discovered specific red flags that expose something far more dangerous than a bad personality. They reveal psychological instability, distortions, splitting. First red flag. They consistently scapegoat one group. Maybe it's a political party, a profession, a gender, or a generation. Jung called this psychological splitting, a sign the shadow has been projected outward so completely that the individual can no longer see complexity. All bad is them. This isn't a strong opinion. It's a warning sign of dangerous fragmentation. Second red flag. They've never been wrong about anything important. This is ego inflation, a total denial of fallibility. Jung saw this as a ticking time bomb, because when reality eventually contradicts the inflated ego, a crisis always follows. The fall feels like death. Third red flag. Their energy shifts drastically when talking about what they hate. A calm person suddenly flares with venom. A passive tone turns sharp. Jung taught that these spikes of emotion point directly to repressed shadow complexes. The stronger the shift, the more powerful the wound. Fourth red flag. They turn the question back on you, aggressively. What about you? Why are you asking me this? Deflection isn't just discomfort. It's a defense mechanism, often triggered when the unconscious feels cornered. And what's being protected is the mask. Now, when you see these patterns, Jung said you'll also start to recognize archetypes, types of people shaped by how they handle projection and fallibility. The inflated ego type, always right, blames others, sees the world in black and white, avoids accountability like poison. The self-deprecating type appears humble, over-apologizes, but never actually changes, uses self-criticism to escape true self-confrontation. And the integrated type admits mistakes, owns projections, seeks understanding, not dominance. Rare, but real. Jung called integration the hallmark of mental health. Because once you integrate your shadow, you no longer need to perform. You don't have to be always right. You don't have to blame. You simply are human, honest, whole. And once you've seen these patterns, you'll start to see them everywhere. In relationships, in leaders, in yourself. Not to judge, but to wake up. Jung's greatest insight was not that we wear masks, but that every person we meet is holding up a mirror, and most of us are too afraid to look. You think that annoying coworker is just annoying. You think that loud, arrogant person is just arrogant. But Jung would stop you right there. He'd say, what are they reflecting back to you? Because the people who trigger you most, who stir up disproportionate emotion, they aren't random. They're lessons in disguise, not monsters, mirrors. This is where the concept of synchronicity enters. Jung's belief that events and people arrive not by chance, but with meaning. You meet someone at just the right moment, not because the universe is cruel, but because it's teaching. If you struggle with boundaries, life sends people who cross them. If you suppress your voice, life surrounds you with those who dominate it. If you fear vulnerability, life puts you face to face with someone who embodies it unapologetically. And your reaction to them becomes your curriculum. Jung didn't say this to make you feel guilty. He said it to make you conscious. Because once you realize others are reflecting your disowned parts, you stop trying to control them and start listening to them. The difficult partner, the frustrating parent, the disappointing boss, they all become invitations, not to fix them, but to meet the part of yourself you've tried to avoid. And this doesn't mean staying in harm's way. It means learning the lesson so you no longer need the pattern. Because unlearned lessons repeat, and they get louder every time. This mirror effect isn't just for personal growth. Jung believed it had profound implications for how we relate, in love, in leadership, in parenting. When you understand your own shadow, you stop punishing your children for traits you fear in yourself. You stop choosing partners based on your wounds. You stop trying to control others' emotions just to regulate your own. Everything softens, not because life gets easier, but because you get clearer. And clarity leads to compassion. When you've seen your own darkness, you stop being surprised by others. You stop labeling people as broken. You start seeing them as humans doing their best to navigate pain, just like you. And that is the beginning of real connection. So here we are, 4 lenses, 2 questions, a lifetime of reflection. Jung didn't leave us with a map, he gave us a mirror. And he whispered, "Look, not at them, at you." He said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That darkness is not your enemy. It's your shadow, and it holds the key to everything you've been running from. The anger, the shame, the insecurity, the unmet needs, the fear of being wrong, the desire to be seen. And now you've seen it. Maybe not all of it, but enough. Enough to know that the real work isn't reading others. It's reading yourself, watching yourself, facing yourself. So the next time someone triggers you, don't rush to blame. Pause. Ask, what is this showing me about me? That's where the transformation begins, because your true character isn't revealed by how you speak, succeed, or shine. It's revealed by what you do when no one's watching, by how you treat those who can't offer you anything, by whether you can admit, without collapsing, "I was wrong." This isn't self-help. It's self-confrontation, and it's the beginning of becoming whole.